A few seconds ago, you lied to Senator Hawley, didn't you?
I'm under oath, Senator. I did not lie.
Now, in this case, United States v. Von Rico Weber, you lied to the defense counsel. You lied to Senator Hawley, didn't you?
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ritz, I'm quite confused about this ethics issue or issues, so maybe you can just help me sort it out. So I don't think I maybe understand the facts here. So you said that you've never been subject to an ethics complaint before. Is that right?
I said, to my knowledge, never been subject to an OPR complaint or any sort of formal complaint.
Okay. I'm looking at a letter from May 16th, 2010 to the Office of Professional Responsibility that reads, "This letter is a formal request that your office investigate matters pertaining to the fair dealing and, more important, honesty of Assistant United States Attorney Kevin Ritz."
If that letter exists, Senator, I was unaware of it until just now.
But you're aware of the issues surrounding the Von Rico Weber case, which is the subject of this letter asking for a formal investigation into you. You're aware of that?
As I said, I do have some recollection of that matter.
Oh, okay. So you were subject to a complaint. I have the letter right here. Let's just try to figure out what's going on in this case. I mean, this was a case involving a public defender who you got a plea agreement with, and then she asked to withdraw as counsel because she said you misrepresented the situation to her, and the court granted her motion to withdraw as counsel. That's pretty unusual, isn't it? I mean, what's happening here? She said that you told her that she relied on information about the nature of the crime, which was, she was told, was going to be a marijuana trafficking offense, and then when she got the PSR, it had a base offense level of 34 because the underlying offense was cocaine trafficking. So she had advised her client, based on your representations, here's what you're going to be likely subject to. They accepted the plea deal. She looks at the PSR, and it's something very different, she says, than what you told her. Now, this is a public defender now. And so on that basis, she had to withdraw as counsel, and the court granted her request. That's very unusual. I mean, what happened here?
Senator, first of all, I believe it was not a public defender. It was a defense attorney on the CJA panel in West Tennessee. There was a written plea agreement that was entered into. That written plea agreement, as with all of our plea agreements, includes a provision that says these are all of the promises made to this defendant by the government.
Yeah, but neither the indictment nor the change of plea transcript nor that agreement says anything about the underlying crime. It just says funds were the proceeds of distributing controlled substances without any specification of the alleged illegal narcotics. So what she says is, you sandbagged her, basically.
And that's not true. I made no such promise along those lines.
But was there any indication before the PSR that you were going to hit this guy with the cocaine? I mean, this is unusual. It's unusual to be a Democrat administration nominate somebody who is accused of, who's hated by federal public defenders, and who's accused of sandbagging indigent defendants. So I'm baffled by this. I am totally baffled by this. So I'm trying to figure out what in the world happened. And then you got taken off this case, I think, right?
My recollection, Senator, is that the office had someone else handle it in case I needed to be a witness at a proceeding.
Well, here's what Vivian Donaldson, who is the counsel who ended up representing the United States, at Ms. Chastain's motion to withdraw as counsel, here's what she said: "These allegations about you are serious. That's one of the reasons I am here," meaning in court, "and Mr. Ritz will more than likely be taken off this case because of these particular allegations." So did that happen?
And I believe it was in case I needed to be a witness. But
well,
those allegations...
This is what your supervisor said in open court. I'm not quoting you now a private letter. I'm quoting you something from open court. She says you were removed from the case because of the allegations, which she says were very serious. Now, you've represented this committee. You knew nothing about all of this. You answered a question in the committee questionnaire that you weren't aware of any complaint. You weren't aware of any disciplinary committee. You weren't aware of any inquiry ever. But yet I'm reading you a transcript from open court in which your supervising attorney says the allegations against you are very serious and you're going to be removed. So I have to tell you, I don't think I'm trying to figure out what in the world is going on here, because it doesn't sound to me like you've been very forthcoming, certainly to this committee. So what happened? Were you removed because of the allegations of improper behavior?
The allegations were false, first of all.
I'm not asking you about your view. I'm asking you about what you told the court and about what your supervising attorney told the court.
And I don't recall exactly why there may have been a change in counsel.
Mr. Ritz, don't you think you'd want to, don't you think that's kind of important information?
These allegations were false, and there was never
You have
a
a
finding.
clear memory of that, but you don't have a clear memory of what happened in open court and you being potentially removed by your supervising attorney. This is very bizarre, I have to say. I've never seen it quite like this. This is very, very strange. And I just noticed that we have a sudden instance of amnesia anytime we're dealing with the actual ethical complaint, but you seem to remember the case exceptionally well. So this troubles me, and it's strange. It's very, very strange. Maybe my Democrat colleagues can clear this up. I'm sure they've vetted you. This is very, very odd. So your testimony is you weren't removed. All of this was false. You were never investigated, and this what? This just all went away, or what happened?
There was certainly no court finding or any other finding by an investigative body of any unethical behavior.
I thought the court then allowed this defendant to change his guilty plea. He pled guilty, and then the court allowed him to withdraw it. That's also very unusual.
It does happen from time to time, Senator.
On the basis of your misrepresentations.
And that was not the finding of the court.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ritz, you are a political activist, aren't you?
I would not consider myself that at all, Senator.
Okay. When you were sworn in as U.S. Attorney, you gave a speech, didn't you?
I did.
Okay. Here's what you said. I'm going to quote from your speech. But you should know that justice for me is about more than putting people in prison. For me, it's also about who votes and how hard it is to cast that vote. It's about where pipelines go. It's about where bus routes go. Justice is about whether people in all zip codes can get a loan, whether women have access to health care, whether citizens have affordable housing or clean drinking water. Sometimes those are Department of Justice issues. Sometimes they are not. But for me, they're all justice issues. Did I read that accurately?
I believe so, Senator.
Okay. Did you really remove the Tennessee state flag from your conference room?
Senator, I appreciate you asking about this again. As the chief federal law enforcement.
Welcome. Did you do it?
So I felt it was fundamentally inappropriate when I gave press conferences and similar statements to the public to indicate or suggest somehow that I spoke for the state, which I don't under our system of federalism.
Are you embarrassed to be from Tennessee?
Not at all, Senator. I am from Tennessee, grew up as a public school kid in Tennessee.
But you were embarrassed to have the Tennessee flag.
That's not it at all, Senator.
Okay. You have a history of lying to your professional colleagues, don't you?
That's not true, Senator.
Okay. Do you know a former public defender named Stephen Shankman?
I knew him to a degree. I'm not sure we ever had any cases together. I knew who he was, yes.
Well, in a private email, not meant for public consumption, to another one of your professional colleagues, this is what Mr. Shankman said, talking about your lying. He said, "It is unfortunate that this is not the first, second, third, or whatever occasion that this sort of thing has occurred. But everyone should be aware of this unfortunate pattern of behavior. You should be aware," he said to the other lawyer, before the other lawyer dealt with you. "Your client should be aware, and you should proceed with extreme caution." Was Mr. Shankman lying?
To the degree he suggested that I acted unethically, that was not accurate, and it wasn't in any occasion, much less on numerous occasions.
Okay, let's talk about this case, United States v. Von Rico Weber, which you claim to not remember. But before I do that, a few seconds ago, you lied to Senator Hawley, didn't you?
I'm under oath, Senator. I did not lie.
You said you have no knowledge of any complaint, professional complaint made against you, didn't you?
I said, I have no knowledge of any sort of formal complaint, and he read from a letter that I don't believe I ever saw.
And you were shocked. You
If
never heard of that before.
if there were a formal complaint, that, as I said, I had not known about that.
Okay. You were amazed.
I don't recall any of that.
Any-
I recall this Mr.
You
Weber's
have
case.
amnesia about it.
Again, I am unaware of any formal complaint or investigation. Certainly was not,
You believe in the Tooth Fairy?
Senator, I don't.
You believe in the Easter Bunny? Now, in this case, United States v. Von Rico Weber, you lied to the defense counsel. And the defense counsel then had to go before the court and withdraw a plea for his counsel. And a complaint was filed, about which you apparently have amnesia. And the Justice Department replaced you. And the lawyer from the Justice Department who replaced you, this is what the lawyer said. The new attorney said about you. Said these allegations against Mr. Ritz are, quote, serious. And it is taken so seriously, referring to the Department of Justice, by our office. That is one of the reasons I'm here, and Mr. Ritz will be more than likely be taken off this case because of those allegations. End quote. You lied to Senator Hawley, didn't you?
I didn't lie to the defense counsel in that case. I didn't lie today, Senator.
Now, my good friend Senator Ossoff asked you if you'd follow the law. And you said, yeah. But if you're lying to us today, we're stuck with you, aren't we?
Senator, I have not lied and did not lie in that case.
You just have amnesia.
I did not lie in that case. There was a written plea agreement with the entire agreement of the parties.
If you believe that, you believe Elvis is alive and running a small bait stand on Lake Erie. Shame on you.
In your 2023 U.S. Attorney Investiture speech, you highlighted the challenges you believe America faces and what justice means. You said, quote, "We're experiencing a long overdue reckoning with racism in the criminal justice system." Mr. Ritz, what part of the criminal justice system needs a long overdue reckoning?
Senator, what I was describing were a number of things that have happened in recent years in this country that framed, I would say, in some ways, the work that we do in the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Is the American justice system systematically racist?
That is not a sentiment that I hold. To the degree there is a definition of what being systematically racist means, I understand some individuals have pointed to disparities in sentencing and that type of thing, but that's not a view that I have.
So that's not a view that you have. That was your testimony. Well, you also said, quote, "There cannot be one rule of law for people who look like me and another for people of color." That sure sounds like the view you just said you didn't have. Do you believe that's our system, that our justice system has one rule of law for people that look like you and a different rule of law for people of color?
No, what I said is that absolutely we cannot have one rule of law for people who look like me and another for people of color. We cannot have one rule of law for the powerless and another for the... There's just one rule of law. That's what I said.
You also said, when asked if the criminal justice system is systematically racist, you said, quote, "There are structural barriers and disparate outcomes that communities of color experience in our society, separate and apart from any individual's views or intentions." Now, that again seems to be saying the same thing that you're saying you weren't saying. I'm just trying to understand what your views are.
And Senator, that was my attempt in that written question to grapple with, again, what was being asked by systematic racism. I understand some have pointed to structural barriers and disparate outcomes.
So what are the barriers and outcomes you're referring to?
I can think of one prominent example that I've had some experience with, which is the disparity in cocaine sentencing between crack sentencing and powder sentencing. This body has addressed those disparities on multiple occasions, and that has been, as I understand it, something that people have addressed as a result of disparities.
Okay, you also said in responses to questions for the record that as the Attorney General has explained, everyone has implicit biases. So what are your implicit biases?
Senator, I understand implicit bias to refer to unconscious bias that exists below the level of consciousness, and so to the degree I have implicit biases, I think we all do. I think that's partly the point. Is
so everyone's a racist whether they know it or not?
And I would say that everyone might have implicit biases, and I don't know what.
So what's the difference between bias and prejudice?
I think there can be a lot of overlap in those things. It depends, I think, on the context.
So you're saying everyone is prejudiced?
That's not what I said, Senator.
You just said everyone has implicit biases, and you said that bias and prejudice, I think your words were, there's a lot of overlap.
I think that's right, and I understand implicit bias, and I'm not an expert on the subject, to refer to a set of biases that may exist under a conscious level. So,
since you talk about these implicit bias issues, have you taken a so-called implicit bias test?
We received training that was put on during the last administration in our office on implicit bias. I attended that training in our office.
And what did you take a test?
I don't believe there was a test associated with that, Senator.
Okay, you also said, quote, "But you should know that for justice, for me, is about more than putting people in prison. For me, it's also about who votes and how hard it is to cast that vote. It's about where pipelines or bus routes go. Justice is about whether people in all zip codes can get a loan, whether women have access to health care." That's an interesting statement, and in reading it, what's striking is that that's de-emphasizing the core role of a U.S. attorney. The last I checked, a U.S. attorney is not in the policy business of deciding where pipelines go. That's the role of environmental activists and left-wing activists, but is not supposed to be a U.S. attorney. Why was your focus elsewhere?
Senator, and the very next thing I said was that those are not issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis in the U.S. Attorney's Office, where we are primarily focused on enforcing criminal laws. I was seeking to place justice as a broad concept at the center of, to place our work within justice as a broad concept.
So do you agree that Memphis is one of the most dangerous cities in the nation?
It is. We have an intolerable amount of violent crime, and that's why there's no higher priority for us in our office.
Well, there's no higher priority except for pipelines, except for bus routes, except for bank loans, except for implicit bias, except for the fact that everyone is prejudiced. All of those other things are what you're focused on talking about instead of actually locking up bad guys who are murdering and raping and hurting people.
In those same comments, Senator, I said that we don't apologize for seeking significant prison sentences, and that's at the core of what we do. When we have serious violent crime, we seek serious sentences and consequences.
Thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Ritz, for standing for this nomination and for being here today. Now, it's my understanding that you were subject to an ethics investigation by OPR. Is that right?
Never in my career.
Never. But you're aware of this situation in United States versus Von Rico Weber, where you were accused of making these material representations to a defendant's attorney in order to elicit a guilty plea.
I have some recollection of that, Senator, but I was not subject to any sort of formal complaint or investigation.
Okay. Well, it's my understanding that in this circumstance, this would have resulted in the defendant serving a 10-year prison sentence, and the accusation is that you led the defendant to believe that a low sentence, a much lower sentence, would be in order, or perhaps even probation. I just want to read to you the letter, the email that we received from the concerned defense attorney, shining light on the incident. The person writing this email is recounting a conversation with the defense attorney in which you allegedly misled the defense attorney and the defendant. After the defense attorney explains it, here's how he explains it. At this point, I stopped the conversation and said, "Was the AUSA Kevin Ritz?" The answer was yes. It is unfortunate that this is not the first, second, third, or whatever occasion that this sort of thing has occurred, but everyone should be aware of this unfortunate pattern of behavior. You should be aware, your clients should be aware, and you should proceed with extreme caution. It is a sad commentary. This is a concerning allegation, of course. Now, I assume that you would agree, certainly, that misleading a criminal defense counsel as to the nature of the charges against the defendant and the likely sentence that might result from a guilty plea, that would violate a federal prosecutor's ethical responsibilities.
Yes, and I did not do that in that case, Senator.
Now, my understanding is that a complaint was made against you with the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility and that an investigation ensued. At what point did you become aware of that investigation?
Again, Senator, to my knowledge, there was never an OPR investigation or a complaint for that matter.
Okay, so you're not aware of anything like that?
That's correct.
Does the information you just heard, the accusation, does that reflect your pattern of behavior as a prosecutor?
Absolutely not. And I recall this, and I recall that the person who had sent that email communication certainly had not communicated with me. I'm not actually sure we had ever had cases together in the first place. In any event, I took action, and I believe I communicated with everyone who received that, because in our federal district, it's really important for AUSAs and defense attorneys to be able to trust each other. And sure. I took my reputation very seriously.
Okay, but you would agree that if you had done those things, if that had resulted in a complaint to OPR and you didn't disclose it, either of those things would be a problem?
If I had acted unethically, absolutely, but I did not.
Now, as you know, one of the most important decisions a U.S. attorney can make is the decision about whom to hire as a first assistant U.S. attorney. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
It's a pretty important thing. It's why I find it disturbing that you chose to hire Ms. Reagan Taylor Fondren to serve as your first assistant, despite the 2 disciplinary investigations that she was under for serious accusations relating to ethics violations. As a former federal prosecutor myself, I know that the fairness of the justice system depends a lot on, among other things, how prosecutors handle things like exculpatory evidence. And withholding exculpatory evidence from defense is a big problem. Ever since Brady versus Maryland was decided in 1963, every prosecutor knows that there is an obligation to disclose these things. Now, when you chose Ms. Taylor Fondren to be your first assistant, were you aware of the 2 ongoing investigations of her alleged prosecutorial misconduct related to failure to disclose exculpatory evidence?
I may have been aware of ongoing proceedings. My recollection, Senator, they were not. They were still proceeding, and I honestly can't remember if they still are today.
So they were pending at the time you chose her. Were you not concerned about that?
Senator, I am not sure I knew the particulars of the situation.
In fact, she began your service as a first assistant before her court-ordered suspension from legal practice was enforced. Is that right?
I believe that's correct, Senator. I'm not actually entirely sure.
Now, a man served 4 additional years in prison because of the misconduct of your first assistant. Now, thankfully, the Court of Appeals corrected her error, but not for the full 4 years. And so, was it in spite of or because of Ms. Taylor Fondren's willingness to violate the defendant's constitutional rights that you chose her to be your first assistant?
Senator, as I said before, I believe that Ms. Fondren and all of our AUSAs are doing an excellent job keeping people safe in West Tennessee. These allegations and this incident occurred, I want to make clear, before Ms. Fondren was part of our office several years ago.
But you were aware of the accusations?
I was aware in a very vague sense.